Palace, and I'm reading this really interesting book called Language Death. So I'm going to give you some of the big pointers that I'm taking away from that, and we're just going to have a little jam here. Whoever shows up for the live, and if you're watching the replay, that's great as well. And I'll tell you about this hat, what's going on with this hat. Don't quite have the shot here, the angle ready for the hat, but this is a very important hat. And also, this is a very important pin that ties into what we're talking about when it comes to the G.A.P for memory palaces and language learning. So definitely check out this replay. If you're on the live, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And if you've got one of these, then you definitely have something to speak about. I don't know if you can see that very well. Oh yeah, there she is. Woohoo! So if anybody knows what that is, type that in the chat. And again, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you're coming from, what you're doing, and we're going to talk about Language Death by David Crystal. We're going to talk about the G.A.P. Hey, Inconvenient Politics from the UK. Great to see you. Thanks for saying hello. Please make this interactive. That's what makes it work. In addition to the G.A.P., we're going to talk about the SIP principle. I love my little index cards. I know. I'm trying to get the OBS software to do its shtick. Let me get on there, but for now, we're just going to have this. Your chats rock these sessions. Your questions, the things you want to say. You want to do super chat, that's great. If not, I don't care. But look at this. This is a great hat. I'm going to talk about this as well, how you can use it for language learning. And this little thing. You need to get one of those. You know, I am waiting for the one of you who's going to do something so extraordinary with language learning and memory palaces that I just am forced to give it to you. So let me know also in the chat, can you hear me properly? You know, I love sitting on my porch, just jamming. So let's start with language death before we get to G.A.P. And you probably already know the SIP principle, but just so that you know, there's a special offer going on right now. So if you can remember the acronym for YouTube special offer, go to magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, which is for YouTube special offer. And that's quite extraordinary right now. Wish I had a better shot for this hat because, oh yeah, there we go. I like this hat. So anyway, I'm going to tell you about the hat in a little bit and how you can use hats in your memory work. But before I do that, oh yeah, we'll talk about this. This is a great little thing for memory too. Before we do that, language death. So why am I reading Language Death? Well, I'm very, very interested in language learning, of course, and one of the things that we need to do in order to really get the most out of memory palaces and out of language learning is to understand more about language itself. So hit me up with a chat if you are interested in language learning and you actually have done anything about learning more about language as such. Now obviously when you're learning a language you're always going to be learning about language as such, but there's something about knowing certain things about language that that really helps you along with that journey. And that's not to get lost in things like grammar and all the rules, because there are tons of them. But then at the same time, we do want some understanding of the rules, because we know language has a certain relationship to music, for example. And one of the things that makes musicians so successful with memory is because they're able to manage multiple kinds of memory at the same time and get it into the muscles. Like there's memory in your fingers, right? Muscle memory. Well, it's the same thing with your tongue when you're speaking a language. And so when you're learning a language, it's not like one kind of memory that's going on at any given time. It's also multiple kinds of memory and memory in the muscle in your mouth, right? So this is sort of what the G.A.P is all about and what we're going to get to. But hit that thumbs up if you're just joining us live. Let me know where you are in the world, and let's make this interactive. Now, why I'm reading this Language Death and also a book called Vanishing is because I'm in Australia at the moment, and I'm very interested in perhaps learning an Aboriginal language. But in order to be in the G.A.P and to sip our way towards fluency when we're learning a language, whether we're using memory techniques or not, we actually need to satisfy some conditions almost all the time. So what those are reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and in a way that serves memory so that we can use memory techniques to serve reading, writing, speaking, and listening, right? So one of the challenges with quote-unquote dead languages is the listening and potentially the speaking part, but you can still speak Latin, for example. You could speak ancient Greek even if your pronunciation was off. So you can get those things. But you also, you have maybe perhaps a lack of community, a lack of processing, a lack of that muscle memory in the mouth that we are talking about. And that can be discouraging. That can make it hard to get in the gap and stay in the gap. And it definitely makes sipping a different equation. So as I'm thinking about what Aboriginal language I could learn, anyway, by the way, has anybody here been interested in an Aboriginal language? Let me know in the chat, and hit that thumbs up if you're just joining us. Again, the value of these things comes from your discussion, so feel free to ask questions. You can interrupt. It's live. So, or if you're watching the replay, you can always hit me up with your questions in the discussion below. So, in terms of a language, it was really interesting, and I can see the problem with and why languages would be dying, because there's just some kind of strange racism going on about them. And I went to the library looking for books that would, maybe give me a language to look at in the Brisbane area that would help guide me into what that might be, so I could practice the reading, writing, speaking, and listening component to serve memory and have memory serve those components of learning the language. But the first thing I see, the woman at the desk at the library, she says, I asked her, where's the Aboriginal Center, so I could ask them about the language I'd be most likely to learn. And she said, oh, you don't want to talk to them. They won't know. What? That's insane. That's the most insane thing I ever heard in my life. And she said, you have to go upstairs. You have to talk to the librarians upstairs. They'll know. They'll be able to help you. And I just thought, this is insanity. So I said, where's the Aboriginal Center anyway? I think I'll visit it. And I went, and I spent the next half an hour, 45 minutes talking to real Aboriginal people about Aboriginal languages, and tried to raise our voice loud enough, or my voice anyway, so that Jatia and Willie, I memorized their names, so that they actually could be heard as being experts in the languages that apparently the employee didn't think that they knew. So I can see the challenge. And there's something morally disgusting about what that person said. And then of course I go upstairs asking about the most rich opportunity to speak an Aboriginal language, to learn one, to hear one, to be exposed to one in this area. And the professional librarian didn't even have a clue what to type into the computer, right? So I had to guide her a little bit. I have worked as a librarian a few times over the years, worked in 3 libraries actually, and so, actually 4 libraries now that I think about it, because I was also the research assistant to one of the major librarians at York University. And that gets to this GAP thing, and it also gets to the SIP thing as well. By the way, libraries make for amazing memory palaces, especially when you're using them to combat language death, as I am now. Anybody read this? Be very, very interested to know if you had. Anyway, so I was really disappointed that, first of all, to be told that the people most likely to know anything about their own languages that are in trouble, in danger, would be the people I shouldn't talk to. And then when I did go upstairs to talk to the librarian, they didn't have a clue. They didn't have a clue how to find that information about it. So I found it myself and started reading these books, and more language learning is becoming so much more prominent and important in my mind, which it always is. Anyway, so about this GAP thing, G.A.P, what's it all about? Well, that's why I'm wearing this hat, because in a podcasting group, there's a really, really interesting and amazing guy named Jonathan Rivera, and he has a newsletter called the Podcast Mogul newsletter, and I already had a podcast for a number of years, but I subscribed to it. It comes through the mail, and it's amazing. You read it, you get just some interesting thoughts to think, some interesting actions to take, and so forth. Anyway, in his Facebook group, which if you're a podcaster, you should find your way into. Oh, and he sent me this hat, which is his logo for the Podcast Factory, which is a cool place to have your podcast taken care of. And if you're an entrepreneur, go over there. And you should be an entrepreneur if you're not, because the alternative is to work for entrepreneurs, or for governments, which aren't exactly entrepreneurial, but they may be businesses. In any case, I put this on here to combine the specialness to create better memory. I saw there was a chat here. Let me just catch up here with F. Hardison. No, but I heard Crystal do an interview about his By My Life in Language, and it was fantastic. Well, thanks for mentioning that, actually. And I think I recognize your name, so thanks also for saying hello in the chat. If you're joining the live, say hello. And yeah, I'm so glad you raised that, because one of the ways that you get the most out of books is you go, and you couldn't do this when I went to university. You couldn't go and see, hey, is there like a TED Talk? Is there a Google Talk? Is there some kind of talk that this person has done on the internet that I could go and watch? Now, like when I was first here in Brisbane and I was looking at the German book club because I want to keep up my German and so forth, they were reading Gunter Grass, and I thought, Im Krebsgang was the novel, if memory serves, and I just thought, well, okay, I buy it, I read it. I started to read it so I can keep up with my German, so I can stay in the gap and keep on sipping along. And I decided not to go to that group because it's I just don't want to read depressing literature. But in any case, the point being is that it was so amazing to me that I could look up Gunter Grass and just watch hours and hours with him on YouTube and really enliven and enrich the connection to his reading, his book. So I read about half the book before I got too depressed with the World War II themes and murder and all this stuff that I just don't want in my head, really, even if I do want to keep up with German. But it really, really felt so amazing to connect with him in that way, in a way that you couldn't. And I'm just binging right now, speaking of language, on Christopher Hitchens. I go through these Christopher Hitchens phases where I just watch and rewatch and then mine through Christopher Hitchens videos that I haven't seen before, and then I go and I read, and oh man, there's just such amazing stuff. His language is so amazing. And that's really one of the key points to this book here. You don't have to be learning an endangered language or a dead language to understand that just constant exposure to language and understanding how language works and really thinking about it, diving into it, dwelling with it, tasting it, sipping it, rolling it around in your mind like a fine wine, just connects you to humanity. It connects you to diversity. It connects you to identity, your identity, the identities of other people. And language contains history. It contains so many things: intellectual wealth, emotional wealth, spiritual wealth, maybe even if you're a spiritual person. And this G.A.P thing that Jonathan Rivera mentioned, from the guy behind this hat and the Podcast Factory and Podcast Mogul and so forth. Free Souls here. Hello. Avery's here. Hi Avery, great to see you. Thanks for that comment, by the way, on the other video. You mentioned, Avery, actually, that you wished that these lives would get more views, the replays. And as I mentioned there, one of the ways to do it is just share this stuff. Post it on your blogs, post it on your Facebook page, share it around, because things like this, these little formulas, the G.A.P and SIP and so forth, they help people break things down. And on the last one, we talked about create. And so you can go watch the last live. That replay is going to stay. Sometimes I take these replays down. So it all depends on how they go and what happens. And sometimes there's technological problems and so forth. But anyway, I'm very glad you're here, Avery. Thanks for saying hello. If you're hopping on that live, hit the thumbs up. And let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what your thoughts are about language. I'm so excited to see someone who knows David Crystal on here. That's what's so amazing about the internet, about this live medium and so forth, is that you just connect with people. And that's what language is so about. We are doing language right now. We are engaging in discourse. And we have this opportunity in ways that we never had before in the world. And so Free Soul's here, Avery's here. Brenner says, thank you for sharing mnemonics with so much passion. I memorize a deck of cards regularly for a brain exercise due to your influence. Thanks again for everything you do and share. Well, Brenner, thank you so much. And, I'd love to know what some of your images are for the different cards, if you want to type that in or email me privately at some point. And, it's just very good that you're doing that and you're reaching out. You're using language to share that, because that's part of what this G.A.P is. So, Jonathan Rivera, Podcast Factory, Podcast Mogul, this is his thing, and I'm wearing this hat. I meant to be doing this for a long time since he sent it to me, and the first thing I did was put this little pin on there. So anybody knows what that pin is, hit me up with a chat. Oh, Brent Dunn's here from PPC Mode. Good to see you doing live, man. Well, good to see you. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. And Yeah, Brent actually has a great YouTube channel, lots of stuff about bots right now for cryptocurrencies, and also great stuff about affiliate marketing and so forth that I learned a lot from in things like that, and was able to get some clarity on really complex issues. I mean, they're not that complex, but it's a lot of whiz-bang, razzmatazz language sometimes, and the memory techniques really, really help, but also having a clear voice, someone who can get stuff up on the screen and you know, open a door. That's what we do with language. That's why language learning is so powerful. And it's part of that connection that we can make with other people, getting in that gap, which we're going to unpack here on this live, and continuing to sip. I know this is like old school, low technology. I'm still struggling with the OBS software so I can get your guys' chat up on the screen. But we'll get there, right? We'll get there actually through sipping at it, one sip at a time. Anyway, so Keith is here. Hey, heard you on the Humanology podcast. Been checking out your YouTube videos ever since. Thanks for saying hello, Keith. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm always happy to be on podcasts. I'm starting to need to use memory palaces to track all the ones that I've been on, but it's just wonderful, wonderful to be able to get out there and to share these ideas with people. Memory Hub's here. Hey, what are some of the most influential, interesting Christopher Hitchens works you've seen? I've heard of him and consumed some of his content, and I was wondering what your thoughts about him are. Okay, so here's the thing with the Hitch. When you want to learn, like, I started this whole live today talking about language death, right? And sharing a little bit of a story. So if you didn't catch that, go back, check out the replay. I won't go through it again. It was the most horrifying story actually that I've seen in a long time. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my mind. It breaks whatever soul one could be said to have. The one that I do have certainly is magnetic. But the thing is, go back and check that out. And Hitch came up because it's not just about preserving other languages that are endangered or dead. It's also about paying attention to the language that we have, the one that you speak. And so the Hitch, Christopher Hitchens, is amazing to listen to speak. His vocabulary is so rich, it's so pointed, it's so direct, so you know, if you reduce the world to Star Wars and like the Force and just being so laser targeted at an outcome and knowing not perhaps exactly what to say, but how to direct one's force and energy and passion and knowledge at a target, so that not only do you fold them in half, but when they hit the ground, they stay down because they haven't got any other choice, right? And they percolate what you're saying, and they come back with either a reflection that they heard what you said, or they, you know, they learn. And everybody who observes learns. And yeah, so the Hitch is great. Now, arguably is, I think, the book I would suggest. There's going to be a lot of things in there. It's big. There's a lot of things in there that might not instantly appeal to you. So well, I don't know. I mean, just get into the Hitch. I mean, but arguably is just an amazing book. His book on dying is amazing. Reading his stuff wherever you can find it is amazing, and following up on his book recommendations. Sorry, I haven't got a better word than amazing. I should have a better word than amazing, but it's again, it's like the diversity of thought, the strength of vocabulary to help you understand not just the one point, but the innuendo and the perspectives and the richness of detail that things have, and that there are no simple answers as such, except for when there are simple answers, and sometimes there are simple answers and we can speak them out loud. So everybody knows Occam's razor, right? Well, there's Hitch's razor, and Hitch would say, I say that like we're on last name truncated basis, but Hitch would say that extraordinary claims, or claims made without extraordinary evidence, you know, can be dismissed without argument, something like that. And he said it in different ways, and actually it's an original Latin sort of saying that was quite common and frequently used back in the day, which I need to memorize the original Latin. But basically, that's just one example where he'd just say, claims made without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, essentially. And it's cool, it's cool. But yeah, so Jonathan Rivera this morning in his podcast Facebook group, really kind of an exclusive thing. So if you're a podcaster, check out the Podcast Factory and get the Podcast Mogul newsletter. Sent me this hat. And he was talking about the G.A.P today, and he was referring to Dan Sullivan, who is a guy I've also followed and learned a lot from in terms of entrepreneurialism. And I couldn't help but play with this G.A.P idea. So I'm not going to talk about what he talked about in terms of that. But I said, yeah, so if we were to take the G.A.P as a whole concept and break it down, it's sort of gradually accelerating progress. And when language learners come into the world, whether they're going after an endangered language or they are, just starting with the most popular language in the world, like English, for example, which a lot of people are, and they're getting their brain cells. That's what that is, but do you know which one? Do you know which brain cell that is? When they're getting into a language, they want it all. They come to me and they're like, I need 50,000 words. And they're not in the G.A.P. They're not even able to start gradually accelerating their progress, right? And continually accelerating their progress and sipping at it, which means to study, implement, and practice. They're not at that, because they are trying to have it all. It's like they watch The Matrix and they see this scene where he plugs in and all of a sudden 15 seconds later he's like, I know Kung Fu, right? Well, that's the wrong way to interpret The Matrix, because it's not about downloading knowledge. The first thing that happens when he says, I know Kung Fu, is Morpheus says, show me, right? And so then he goes into a training sequence. And what it turns out is that, yeah, he's got some moves, but he doesn't really know Kung Fu. He needs to gradually accelerate his progress. And basically the rest of the movie is not him being the one, it's him gradually accelerating his progress towards being the one in the G.A.P. And what happens at the end? Well, yeah, we have this sort of Superman thing at the phone, right? He doesn't change his suit at the phone, but he's already in his suit at the phone, which sort of is like out Supermaning Superman in a way, and then he flies off into the sky. But where is he? He's not in the real. He's in the Matrix. He's in the G.A.P, and he needs to gradually accelerate progress, right? So if you really understand how to read movies and you really think about them properly, the lessons inside of them are way more profound. And it's not about, ooh, yeah, I can download 50,000 words like that. No, you've then got to practice them. You've got to get them into muscle memory. You've got to read, write, speak, and listen in a way that serves memory, and then have memory serve how you read, write, speak, and listen. It's so simple. People make it so complicated. And then what you get out of that is you get diversity, you get identity, you get history, you get, oh man, access to all of human knowledge. You get more than half of the human race, is at least bilingual, and you get to enter that. You get to be part of that. That's amazing. It's amazing. And then there's a percentage that's trilingual, just by virtue of birth. This is amazing. It's amazing. And you get to encounter more art, more literature. You get to encounter more structure. So I talk about how language is like music, and how musicians manage multiple levels of memory at the same time, including muscle memory. Well, you get to experience language as a structure, see it as a structure, and you realize so much about your mother tongue as you're learning another language. It absolutely just widens your mind, and then you gradually accelerate your progress in two languages, the one you're learning and the one that you're actually coming from. And so in this book, there's a really wonderful quote from Roland Barthes, who is a French philosopher. And the quote is, language is a skin. Language is the skin I rub up against other languages. And that's like very similar to what I talk about in how you use mnemonics for learning a language. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take all these images that you have in your head for free from years of watching TV and movies and reading books and looking at politicians and listening to music and all of this rich cultural diversity that you have in your own mother tongue, and then you're going to rub that up on the skin of another language, and it's going to become magnetic, right? It's going to become magnetic in exactly the way that a balloon becomes magnetic and sticks. And if you have a memory palace in the mix, which really is not rocket science, although a lot of people, they want to have one memory palace, which is the quickest path to failure. You got to have multiple memory palaces to really explore spatial memory, to really get your dimensionality going for yourself and really understand it. then you're gonna be able to gradually accelerate your progress, right? Gradually accelerate your progress by moving forward, sipping at it. Study, implement, practice. Study, implement, practice. So you can study and implement and practice mnemonics, and you can use a language to study and implement and practice the language and mnemonics at the same time. So it's like win, 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 win. And they don't interfere with each other. They mesh, they fuse, they magnetize, they stick in place, like that balloon that you rub on your clothes and you stick it on the wall in your memory palace. So I love that quote from here about Roland Barthes and the idea that language is a skin that we rub up against each other. So we've got some more comments here from Brenner. Oh, Brenner's sharing some of his images for cards. So Superman for the King of Hearts, Michael Jackson for spades, Diamond, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Wow, that's cool. Elvis, right on. Those are great. Yeah, I don't have Superman for a card, but I do have him for one of the numbers in my 00 to 99. So Superman definitely plays a role in my life, and of course, not just any Superman, but a particular scene from a particular Superman movie, which makes it much more magnetic. Get very, very specific. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm getting at here with the language thing. And then the beauty is when you can actually memorize languages, or memorize words and phrases, better said, sentences, grammatical concepts and so forth, then you actually can learn more about language at the same time, faster, which you have a sort of dual communication between the language that you're learning, the language you already know, and then you have that future third or fourth or fifth language that you're going to add in there. And another thing that David Crystal here makes in this Language Death book is that there's no such thing as a primitive language. And I think that the point that he doesn't say there is that we often feel very primitive when we try to learn a new language, because we feel like we're reduced to a baby. But he quotes Emerson in here, and Emerson said that actually if you don't learn a language, then you're going to if you don't learn a language before you travel, or at least put some time into a language before you travel, then you are really a baby. You're less than a primitive. You're more like a primitive baby. So by the way, if you're hopping on this live, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in there. F. Hardison asks, any tips on memorizing phrases or sentences? Yeah, absolutely. First thing is know how to make a memory palace. Right now, I've got a very special offer on the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass that will take you into all of this. So you can go to magneticmemorymethod.com, and the / for that special offer is YTSO. That Y does not look very good. Let me just pop that on there for you. YTSO, magneticmemorymethod.com / YTSO, and the acronym there stands for YouTube Special Offer. So go and check that out. Now, in terms of tips for memorizing phrases and so forth, let me know what you're struggling with, because when you it depends. If you're using the magnetic memory method, then you're going to have a memory palace, and you're going to know about the particular strategies inside of that, which we can't unpack all right here, right now. But essentially what you need to do is you need to create magnetic imagery, as I call it, that allows you to recall the sound and the meaning. So, and I love to test myself. I like to memorize things and hear them once, and then, well, actually, technically hear them more than once, but encode them once, and then get them into use a couple of times. But have that first encoding, it's called elaborative encoding in the science. Have it really, really sharp. Make sure that it's 100%, right? Because it's good for your brain cells. Still waiting for someone to let me know what that is. I think this is the first time that I've shown it. Anyway, the thing is that if you hear something like what was it? 我们离开以前做了这个事. Right? That's something that I needed to learn in Chinese. So I wanted to hear it once, and then I just let a week and a half go by just to test it, to see if I could get it. And my tones are still a little bit off. But in any case, it's understandable. And the tip here is that the imagery that I created needs to help me get the meaning and the sound back so that I can get it into reading, writing, speaking, and listening, and that it makes my memory better just by doing it, and it serves the reading, writing, speaking process. It allows memory to serve those things. So in that case, the memory palace was just very spontaneously created, what I call an impromptu memory palace. And I leave out woman because I know what that means. I don't need to encode it, but I need to have really, really strong imagery so that I can get back to it every time and every piece. You don't want to miss out a piece because the phrase is kind of like dominoes, right? And they need to tip over. And one needs to get you to the next in a way that lets you remember the sound and the meaning. And so when you have something like this, the first thing is Li Kai, right? And so it's Li Jeans with a kite. So the memory palace, I've got another video. You can go and look at the memory palace, or you can study memory palaces. But the memory palace is important. It's important. But Li Kai, so how am I going to memorize that? So Li Jeans, right? And then a kite. And so kite and Kai are not the same thing. How are you going to remember that? Well, you just go with it. You don't worry about it too much. You're going to remember. You're going to remember. And if you make a mistake, big deal. You just analyze the mistake. In this case, I didn't. Sometimes I will add a thing from the image. Mostly not, though. It's kind of just like letting it go. And the musical metaphor is really important here because musicians are very good at letting the small details go and looking at the larger structures and then having it in the muscle memory, having that guide the procedure. And incidentally, all of what this is leading to is getting it into long-term memory. So when I actually recited that, I was struggling a little bit just because I haven't used that phrase enough, or rather, I haven't had enough reason to use it, and I'm testing sort of in an Ebbinghaus kind of n=1 scientific study way. I'm testing exactly how infrequently I can still get it back without doing normal recall rehearsal procedures, and it's quite nice. But you have what's called in memory science the reserve, okay? So reserve, and this is very important for gradually accelerating your progress when you're in the gap, is you develop a reserve. The more that you learn the language, the more reserve you develop. Because, for example, you don't have to encode something like "whoa, man," right? Because you know it, so you just leave it out. You know that it needs to be there, so you don't need to create an image for it. And same thing with things like Zola and Chega, right? So just to give you the whole image here, it's Li Jeans and a kite, and then Et is there with yen burning in a teacup, Yi Tian, right? And then Zola is there, and then Che Guevara, so Zola, and then Che Guevara is Chega, and then Shi. And so there's like a little bit of a image there, but it's very vague. But the point is it's got to be dominoes. One's got to trigger the other and trigger the other. So that's the biggest tip that I can give you, really, is that if you're going to do this in your memory practice, it's probably not for everyone. I have to try and find a way to make it for everybody, because it is. But there's some people who just won't do it. Some people really are into it. They just love it. And those people can improve. They can improve by practicing it more, being more strategic about it, doing some more planning in their language learning, having goals and milestones, not overwhelming themselves with massive 50,000 word goals, but rather, hey, what would be the 10 phrases that I could do today that would instantly make me more fluent in situation X, you know? This is all covered in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, and in detail also with this month's special offer at magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, YouTube special offer. So go and check that out now, please, and get in the gap. Gradually accelerate your progress, because when you build up that reserve, the more words and phrases you memorize, then what ends up happening is you get so much out of the language. You get to be able to refer to more things. So like, why do I even know Zola, for example, who then helps me with Chinese often, right? Well, because I spent some time with French here and there, you know, being a Canadian, one might. So, you know, and Germinal is a really important novel that I love a lot. So, you know, he's useful, but it's exposure to multiple multiple things. And when I went to Greece, started memorizing some contemporary Greek. Well, German, turns out, knowing German turns out it gave me, at least, tons and tons of instant images that I probably never would have thought of if I hadn't had the German. So you get this diversity of images. And because I know German, it's my best language, really, because I know it, and then I spent more time with its culture. So like all of Rammstein is much deeper for me because I know Rammstein lyrics, And so those music videos are more deeply connected to me as potential virtual memory palaces, as are all the band members. And Einstürzende Neubauten are more personal to me because I know what the band name means, I know what a lot of the lyrics means, yada, yada, yada. Who else? Well, I mentioned Gunter Grass at the beginning. There's lots and lots of things that happen the more that you enter a language and you gradually accelerate your progress. You get more memory tools. You get more of everything that I've just been reading in this book about language death and why we need to stop it. So you get more diversity, more mental diversity, more brain cells. Yeah, that's right. So that's right, F. Hardison. More brain cells. You get it more. You get it. You get identity. You get more identity because when you are, for example, you learn a language and you get into Rammstein, for example, and so you can sing along. Ich werde in die Tannen gehen, dahin, wo ich sie zuletzt gesehen. Like you start to have it in your soul, and you study and you memorize some lyrics from Marlene Dietrich, for example, and then you get it in your soul, and it's deeper and deeper inside of you, and then you have more tools. So, Marlene Dietrich, would never have become a powerful bridging figure in my memory palaces if she doesn't come into me, And then she connects with other people between me and them because I'm able to sing some Marlene Dietrich songs with them. I was in Berlin in Germany and we went on tour with another band, the band I was in. We went on tour and we're singing old German songs together and really connecting in a way that just doesn't happen if you don't have that. And it's the sum of human knowledge, and your access to it goes. But you got to study, you got to implement, you got to practice. One sip at a time. So you can gradually accelerate your progress and build up that reserve. And I know reserve is kind of like a heavy-duty scientific term, but it's basically like, imagine, what's a good metaphor here? I'm for some reason I'm thinking about like milk and leaving milk in the fridge, and then but that's just gross. But sediment builds up. Sediment, and when you have a solid core, and you plant a tree in the solid core, then it's more likely to stand up straight and grow. And then the roots underneath are more likely to be more rhizomatic and interconnected, and not just go up and down, but left and right and diagonal and all over the place. So that's really amazing, and you get so many cells growing in your brain. Anyway, one of the cool things about this hat from Jonathan Rivera and Podcast Factory and Podcast Mogul and so on is a lot of people don't think about this, but you can use hats as memory palaces, just like really small, right? You can connect so many things. So with that Chinese example, for example, I wasn't using a hat, but I could have used a hat. And if you wanted to memorize the word for hat in a language, well, just think of your favorite hat, or think of your dad's hat, or maybe you think of Elton John wearing a funny hat with a feather. Well, that can become a kind of small memory palace. It's space in the world, right? And so, let's say you were learning German and you wanted to remember that podcasting is podcasten, right? Then you could just take the Podcast Factory and maybe have the hat that you've seen on this video and just have a giant N crashing down on it, so it's podcasting. That's not a particularly hard example, but let's say there was some other word that was more difficult in German. What would be related to podcasting? I don't know, but let's say it was something like Signal, right? Which is German for the English sentiment of umpteenth, as in the umpteenth time. So now I could have maybe Zig Ziglar on this hat, and he's with Malcolm McDowell from Clockwork Orange. Signal, right? And of course, those both have more than the information that's needed. But likewise in music, when you're reading music, you might not need all that information there, but because you're a trained musician, you just read it and you get what you need from that, because you're managing multiple levels of memory, and you're able to ignore some of the details essentially to keep the piece going. So it's really amazing. I think there needs to be more discussion on this channel and amongst mnemonists in general, memory teachers and whatnot, about the relationship between using memory techniques and music, because it is essentially creating sheet music in your mind, but instead of the music stand and paper and notation, you have the memory palace and you have magnetic images that you put out there on there. And just like in music, you gradually accelerate your progress. You're never done as a musician. You're always gradually accelerating your progress. You always have some next level to go to, and you take it one step at a time. Study, implement, practice. It's amazing. Learners need to do that if they really, truly want to learn. If you want to learn, let me know. Say hell yeah in the comments. Everything's gotten quite quiet, so if you got any questions, let me know. And be a learner. Be on top of things, and read books. Go to the library. Get physical books in your hand. Philip says, hell yeah. F. Hardison says, heck yeah. Yeah, we can avoid the hell and go to heck for sure. Anything will do. It could just be yeah. But get engaged. Be active. Be a supporter of these things that you like, and be on the goal. Be on the goal. Avery's here. Heck yeah. All right, Avery. Yeah, I'm glad you're still here. Thanks for chiming in again. And hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. And say hello. If you've got questions about any of this, some people, they might be watching this and they're thinking, yeah, well, that's just all common sense, isn't it? Oh, yeah, but common sense isn't so common, and common sense is also less often acted upon. So back to John, I keep hitting this. I don't wear hats that often. Avery says thumbs up, awesome. Back to Jonathan Rivera and Podcast Mogul newsletter and the Podcast Factory. He had this contest and I won it, and it was to come up with an acronym for bots. And so I used boring old technology succeeding, and that was not only talking about like stuff that we do on the internet, but also for memory techniques, right? Like a lot of people, they go to apps. Oh man, it drives me crazy with all these apps, as if they're ever going to escape the fundamental laws of the brain and the beauty of the brain unassisted by the apps. So a boring old technology succeeding is something like a memory palace, thousands of years old. Boring old technology succeeding even to this day, and in fact succeeding often in spite of the technology. Because I had a great interview for the podcast coming up with a scientist who, well, great because of her information. I think I fumbled some of my questions, as I sometimes do. But we're talking about science and the study of technology for helping people improve memory. And it seemed from the way the scientific write-up was that the software, and it's quite a famous software that a lot of people are pumping lots of their hard-earned gold into, and they're making scientific claims about how well that the technology works. But the research, as I understand it, and as I understand her from how she described it, the research is that it's not really the technology that's doing it. It's because these people have coaches that call you every week to reinforce the technology. Now that's a bot in the Jonathan Rivera sense. BOTS, boring old technology succeeding. It's not the app. It's not. It's the actual follow-up from a human, the connection, right? The encouragement, which I try to do through these lives, is encouraging. Julie's here. Hi, Julie. Hi from California. What was the title of the book you just held up? It's David Crystal's Language Death. And let me know in the comments. Give me a hell yeah if you'd like to know more about how that I managed to read half this book in about half an hour and remember things about some of the quotes that are in it. For example, that he talks about Genesis 10 in the Bible and makes a particular point about Genesis 10. I'll tell you what that point is if you're interested. But in any case, why I remember particular quotes from Roland Barthes, for example, why I remember particular quotes from Emerson. I almost thought it was Thoreau for a second, but my image reminded me that it was Emerson. And if you're interested in a future live about how to read half a book in half an hour and remember the most significant details about it, I will let you know. And I can tell you, it might involve index cards, but actually it's not the index cards doing these references that I did it. But we got 1 from Philip. Good. Let me know. I mean, I'm not going to say I'll only do it if I get 10, but I like to know what you guys need so you can keep in the gap, gradually accelerating your progress. Do you like these little things, by the way? I love them. We got DOC now. We got Peach. We got Rap. We've got iDozer. Oh, we got a whole bunch. So if you haven't watched any of the previous lives, I know that lives are not the same on the replay, but go and check them out. And some of them, of course, have been removed, and you never know. I think this one will stay. We'll keep it. But they often are changed and refined for the Magnetic Memory Method Mastermind. And so special offer right now is YTSO, magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, if you would like to have the mastermind. And grab it. I'd love to see you in there because we need more diversity, just like we need more language. We get to express our identity more when we have more memory techniques, when we're using them, when we're encouraged to use them to actually accelerate our progress, to amaze ourselves by what is possible. And I have a really special spot in my heart for the skeptics because a lot of people are rightly skeptic of the exaggerated claims. But you know, Ron White just released a great video. I watched it this morning. Check out Ron White's channel, you know. He just has this amazing video where he showed footage of him losing to Nelson Dellis. And yeah, there's a lot of really interesting and subtle points that he draws out there. And you know, I still haven't managed to get a time with him to interview him on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, but if you'd like to hear him interviewed on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, reach out to him and say, hey, let's get this together. And I'll be reaching out as well. I know he's very busy guy. And I appreciate every person who has been an interviewee on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. And I love too that some of the students of the Magnetic Memory Method have become interviewees and, well, I'd say more like guest hosts of the show because they've become, you know, they become owners of the technology, the boring old technology succeeding, the bots. Let's write that down. This one, of course, we share credit with Jonathan Rivera, but he had this amazing contest, which I'm so glad to have won. And by the way, he sent me an amazing hardcover book, which I don't have at the moment, and it's kind of like a secret. So maybe I'll figure out a contest that will tell you what the secret book is that I won when I came up with the words for boring old technology succeeding. I think we can get a better S there. I don't like that S. Let's get a better S. Oh, this is boring for the replay. Boring, boring. Oh, poor attention spans. No, that S isn't any better. I think the first S was better. Anyway, boring old technology succeeding. Get in there with the boring old technology because it often is the faster path to success. All the time that people are spending with apps and so forth, and the evidence just isn't there yet that it's helping anyone, but the evidence is there that it's doing us harm. It's doing us harm, unfortunately. And that doesn't mean it's always going to be that way. And I am generally a supporter of the apps that could mitigate the harm and accelerate the progress. Maybe gradually, maybe faster than gradually. I know I dissed earlier the whole matrix thing. Well, I didn't diss the matrix. I dissed the way it's interpreted and the better way to interpret it. But you know, the thing is that Gabriel Whiners, who's also been on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, if you haven't heard that episode, a lot of people said, why are you interviewing him? He's like doing stuff that you're totally against. It's not that I'm against it. In fact, I support his idea, his concept, and I really want to see it. And I you know, I'm going to be able to use the app, the beta, go through test conditions, and I'm going to diligently show up to it and see it. And I'll judge it when I get there. There's a YouTube channel that I won't mention, but he broke my heart yesterday. He broke my heart like I couldn't believe. He was dumping over a book that he'd never actually read. He was dumping over a very, very controversial figure right now about things that they do without ever having a personal session with that guy. This is illogical and it's bad and it's happening all over the internet. It's morally disgusting and it shouldn't be happening. It's snark, and I can't sort of understand it. So why I had Gabriel on the show is because I want to understand like what's motivating this when we know that there's tried and true paths to remembering. ancient, boring old technology succeeding, like the memory pals. We know that that's there. So what makes him passionate about doing it? And could he be the one who cracks the code? Because all evidence actually shows, as we're going to see on an upcoming episode of the podcast, which if you're not listening to the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, please go to magneticmemorymethod.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the show so you get notified when new podcasts come out. We're going to have some very, very good discussion coming up with Christine Till, who talks about her research using memory training apps with particular people who need memory training the most and what actually got them results. And it wasn't the technology. It was the boring old technology succeeding, the bots, human interaction. Now, as she's to be the first person to say, and by the way, this all applies to language learning. So I'm not going to name any of the language learning apps apart from Gabriel Whiners, which sounds to me the most exciting and appealing. If ever anyone's going to crack the code, it's him. And you got to listen to that interview because he talks about how and why he's cracking the code. I don't know anybody else who's done that. And I have not only been to startup companies, been invited to several of them, and one even tried to hire me, and it didn't pan out. And it didn't pan out for any negative reason, but I didn't see them doing what Gabriel's doing in order to get his beta to hit the ground running. So it's not that it isn't possible, and I would never crap over things like this guy that on another channel I can't believe people spew nonsense and hatred over things they haven't read. They spew nonsense and hatred over things they haven't tried, and so forth. I am 100% on board to test what Gabriel's doing with the Fluent Forever app. And if it works, I'll be the first one to champion it. I suspect that what will work about it can be enhanced by mnemonics, and I would love to be part of making that clear to people how that can be. I can already make it clear how you can do it with any language learning app. It's very, very simple. The problem is that you don't need the app. So why even go to the app in the first place? And I've done many, many hours of experimentation about it. I've been to many language learning conferences, and I've talked to all these people about the different language learning apps, and they're like, why is it that I have all the badges, I've passed all the levels, I score all the points, but then I come to this language learning conference and I can't speak a damn word? And I said, yeah, well, I've had that happen too. And I go through all of it. And it's because playing with an app is not reading, writing, speaking, and listening to the language. It's not even memorizing it. It's actually memorizing it in the context of the app. That's why real musicians, they play from memory. They might still have the sheet music in front of them when they perform, or they might not. But even if they have the sheet music in front of them, they will be able to go off and play without the sheet music, because you've got to be able to play it, right? And what these apps do is they actually prime your memory, they link your memory to the apps themselves when your memory actually occurs, but it's learning linked to the app. It's like Pac-Man when you get really good at level 12, right? Well, where are you going to do that out in the world? You're going to do it when you're playing Pac-Man. Nowhere else. Nowhere else. You ever read Ready Player One? I think I've got a podcast in me brewing just about the memory issues from Ready Player One. We'll see. But in any case, there's something about skilling and de-skilling, and a lot of people are actually de-skilling their language learning abilities by locking them into apps and not actually learning the language because they're not taking it out into the world. Speaking of which, there's another great interview on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast with Ollie Richards, which you should please go and check out. And if you are interested, since that I've got 1,000 index cards here, I love index cards. They're so good for your memory. If you haven't taken Ollie Richards' Spanish course, the free course, you can go to magneticmemorymethod.com/OS. That stands for Ollie Spanish. So if you forget it later, just think magneticmemorymethod.com/OS. I'm throwing a zillion links at you, of course, but hopefully these little acronyms help you make it memorable. And one of the great things about Ollie is he'll be the first person to say that you got to gradually accelerate your progress. Let's check in with some of the chats. Keep them coming, guys. I don't mean to ignore them, but I get on a roll here. So Julie says, Crystal is a great writer. Yes, I need that. Yes, I like the DOC. Peach, iDozer, SIP. Yes, well, thanks, Julie. Thanks for letting me know. If you're just hopping on the live, say hello in the chat. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already. And, we're talking about the G.A.P. We're talking about SIP. We're talking about bots. Having a great time. Language death. I'm surprised now. 2 people already know David Crystal. This is the first time I heard about him. But this is the amazing thing, and why libraries are still important. I have a great friend, Nick. I don't know, maybe he's on live now. Sometimes he's on these lives here in Brisbane, and we have this sort of ongoing debate slash argument about finding book recommendations. And I'm like, nothing beats the bookstore, nothing beats the library. When I was a student, I learned so much by what I came to call bibliomancy, or part of what I call bibliomancy, which is just going and finding the one book that you need and then grabbing 15 of the books and then quote unquote speed reading them. I don't really think of it as speed reading, but that would be the term that's sometimes used. But I don't call it speed reading because I'm not a speed reading expert, but I do have friends in high places who are. And I what I do in magnetic memory method is distinctly different. So let me know if you want to hear on a future live all about how I read half this book in half an hour, and can refer rather intelligently to what I read. We'll talk about that in the future. Avery says, funny that you're talking about language. I've been thinking about learning another language lately. Always had trouble keeping things in my head though. Well, Avery, that's great. Please do as soon as possible, because you're going to get so much more diversity of thought, diversity of culture, diversity of ideas. There are ideas in other languages that they can't exactly be experienced unless you experience them in that language. And there's just many wonderful adventures. So let me know, what language are you interested in, and just dive in, find a way. And then once you dive in, just sip at it. Study, implement, practice, and find your way to gradually accelerating your progress. And understand that it's a journey. And it's a journey that you keep on. And memory palaces, yeah, maybe they're not for everybody, but everybody has spatial memory. Memory palaces is just a fancy word for location-based mnemonic. So mnemonics is a bridging term or an umbrella term for any technique that helps you remember stuff. So rote learning, and I know I'm against rote learning, but I still use index cards, even though I don't use them in a rote learning way, because it's not necessary to do that. But they are a helpful tool. But rote learning is technically a mnemonic. It is a memory technique. There's no doubt about it. Repeat exposure. And to some extent, we do need repeat exposure, but I feel in some way that I'm continuing Ebbinghaus's n equals 1 work, and that is really wonderful and a profound thing to do. And every person who gets into mnemonics continues that work, because you're just learning how to associate space with all of the modes, the magnetic modes, which are your visual, your auditory, your kinesthetic, your olfactory, your gustatory, and your conceptual sense, along with your spatial sense. And so that's really great to be able to do, and anybody can do it. And one of the things that came out of this interview that I just had, that I'll be releasing soon with Christine Till, is just how, and I talked about it in the Memory Connection. So if you haven't read the Memory Connection, please do consider getting it, because it talks about this in great detail, and it tells you how to unpack your preferred sensory modes and to build what I call a learning hierarchy for yourself. And one of the things that we're doing, and Jonathan Levy and I are thinking about doing, these are like these year-long projects, but it's figuring out how we can fund research to find where in the brain what's happening. Now, Stephen Kosslin does some of this already in a book called The Case for Mental Imagery. Read it. It's amazing. But, we're going to crack the code here. If something like in The Matrix is possible, where he's like, I know Kung Fu, without the practice element, which you need, if something like that is possible, it's going to happen because we have figured out how to do it without the technology. And it's not going to be like that in the movies. It's going to be more like a martial art. And it's going to have sipping, one sip at a time. It's going to involve bots, because the human brain doesn't evolve nearly as fast as technology, and you're going to need to get in the gap. So get in the gap and stay in the gap. Rock and roll. Okay, so Avery says Hebrew and Spanish. All right, muy bien. So, Spanish, go right now, please, to magneticmemorymethod.com/OS and take Ollie's free course on Spanish. You're going to love it. He's such a great teacher of language learning. He's a great teacher of Spanish, and he's a great friend of mine. I miss him dearly, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other soon. By the way, Ollie was at Magnetic Memory Live in 2015 with Mark Shannon, and we had a great time. We had a great time, and I hope to do another Magnetic Memory Live session soon, and to have great people like that at the event because they're so knowledgeable and so inspiring. And the Magnetic Memory Live recordings are available, actually. And you know what? Just spontaneously, if you let me know that you used magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, I'll throw in the Magnetic Memory Live recordings free. So let me know that you responded to this offer, that you were here on this call, and you can get them. Ollie Richards was there. To tell you the truth, the Magnetic Memory Live recordings, what makes them so valuable is the hour-long presentation that Mark Shannon made about the habits that he used to become world memory champion. That is so valuable, and it's only in the Magnetic Memory Live recordings. And then, of course, in the Magnetic Memory Live recordings, what you get is you actually get to see the students who were there creating memory palaces live. And then we actually implement them live. And there's some worksheets and stuff that are particular to that. It's more of a supplemental course, and you can grab it at YTSO, magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO. Let me know that you were here, add it, have it added. Would you know, just ask my assistant to get that added to your account. You're gonna love it. It's for Mark Shannon's presentation above all, because so many people, that's what they're struggling with. They're like, yeah, okay, study, implement, practice. Yeah, okay, gradually accelerate progress. I get that, but what do I do? Where do I start? Where do I begin? And his talk on habits is valuable. What you do is you go in, you grab it, and you get it. You watch every video from beginning to end with your memory journal. I teach you about creating a proper memory journal, or at least the basis for creating a proper one that's going to serve you the best. And then what you do is you take notes on everything in your memory journal, and you make sure that you take a special care with your notes from the Magnetic Memory Live with Mark Shannon, and then implement what he says, because that is going to make a huge difference for you, especially if you struggle. Oh, I love that. What a great memory, and what a profound memory palace. I wish you were there, because you could use that place. We were in London. Oh, what a beautiful, beautiful memory palace. And the whole area, we actually went for lunch together, and that's another separate individual memory palace. And then Ollie and I, it was a lot of work to put together, but we have memory palaces all around London where we met, and also his place, his apartment is a memory palace, and actually his apartment in Cairo is also another famous memory palace. It's famous to me. Well, it's famous actually because it's been shown. He drew it when he was learning the Magnetic Memory Method, and that's been shared a few times. You may have seen it. And what a beautiful place he had in Cairo. What an amazing place. Actually, I know for a fact that someone who took up this offer today is in Cairo right now at magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, and he's in Cairo, and that just brought back all these memories and all the memory palaces that I have in Cairo. Oh, wow, what an interesting place. And I was there for a number of reasons, and unfortunately I got hurt and wound up on my back, but that enabled so many things. Maybe those are stories for a different day. Let's catch up with some of our live. So Carolyn says the current S in bots is fine. Okay, please say more about what you mean. I'm not totally catching that. But yeah, Avery, Hebrew and Spanish. Hebrew's great. I did biblical Hebrew during my doctoral years for the PhD, and then I've been in Israel quite a few times, and tashbetz is my favorite Hebrew word at the moment. And there's a great memory palaces just keep coming to mind. So Jonathan Levy had me at a wonderful, wonderful occasion with his family, and yeah, I remember memorizing all their names and then getting them to tell me a word in Hebrew and memorizing that with them. That was great. So Quinn, apropos this topic, Kai asks, how many memory palaces do you use? Do you ever worry that there's a chance that too many of them will eventually make it hard to recall certain info? That's a great question, Kai, and here's the answer. There are never too many memory palaces. There are only too little. There are only too little, and the reason why is that the brain is not like a sponge. A lot of people think that the brain and memory think it's a sponge, which is to say it'll get too filled up and you'll have to squeeze out some information to make room for more. I don't believe that. I believe that the memory is more like a endlessly, eternally expanding set of cities, neighborhoods, countries, and so forth. And part of that comes from a talk that Dr. Gary Small gave on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. This is going back a couple of years, still very valuable. By the way, my podcast is built to last. So the old stuff doesn't die. There's like one episode of the podcast that is no longer relevant, but I made sure to make it relevant anyway. And that is when I just at the last minute had Dave Farrow on, because he was giving away free tickets to Magnetic Memory Method fans to a memory training and competition event at the last minute, and we put that in there. But I made sure to ask him some questions that you're going to find super valuable, so listen to it anyway. But anyway, Gary Small, he was talking about all the metaphors. It's not like a computer. It's not like a disk. It's like a city with neighborhoods, or even better, a country with cities with neighborhoods, and inside of those neighborhoods are homes. So we know that the reason why we forget information is because it's very hard to pay attention to information when it's coming in, and the brain just disperses it. It's like boom, it just scattershots it all over the chemical nature of the brain. And so if you imagine something like a name. So I had a one-on-one coaching session, or I'd rather call it a strategy training, personal training session with a client the other day, and he threw some names at me because we were talking about how to memorize names, and the names were Anesthesia, Bertha. Now, if I didn't use memory techniques, what would happen is, or it wasn't Anesthesia, Bertha, it was the name Anesthesia and the name Bertha, and so if I hadn't said, okay, I'm going to memorize these things, the mind would just boom, it would just scattershot it all over the place. And what we do with memory techniques is, instead of scattershotting it into multiple neighborhoods that then need to be, through the process of decoding, repopulated into a singular unit. This is all sounding a bit gobbledygooky, but let's try and unpack it as we go forward to make it more clear. But if something is split up into millions of pieces, in order to get it back, it needs to, at least a substantial percent of those shattered pieces need to come back into a singular whole, right? Now we can get into the nitty-gritty about how a name is not a singular whole. Anesthesia and Bertha are actually collections of sounds, and they also have connected to them the letters of the alphabet and all kinds of other things, right? It's like music again. Multiple levels of memory are going to happen at the same time. But if I don't do anything, it's just gone. It's gone, right? Because you don't pay attention to it. So you have no way of encoding it using magnetic imagery, for example. And there's multiple levels of magnetic imagery, and the more that you apply, the more you're going to get out of that. So in terms of being able to recall it, because it's not going to be millions of pieces scattershotted throughout millions of cities and millions of neighborhoods inside of the cities, and then millions of homes inside of those cities. It's going to actually, now this is theoretically, this isn't necessarily what happens, but it's going to be more connected together. So what wires together fires together. You know that phrase? So you have neurons, and then you have the synapses between the neurons, and it's like chemical change. The chemicals are changing, and when we actually pay attention to the information and we interact with the information, hey, Tubi Medi, thanks for being here. Thanks for saying hello. If you're just joining us, say hello. Hit the thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world. I know there's some comments here. I'm going to catch up with them in a minute. But so you got your neurons, and you've got the synapses, and they're like, and okay, like I'm not a brain scientist here, but as I understand it, they're positive and negative ions that flow through the synapses between the neurons. And when we hear an piece of information, whether it's a phrase like the Chinese phrase example that I gave earlier today, these neurons are like, boom, they're lighting up if we help them light up. And they're wiring together so they can fire together later when we essentially ask them to, right? And so if we have a memory palace in play, and we're good with memory palaces, which is super easy to get good at with just a little bit of practice, and remember, memory palaces are best served as bots, boring old technology succeeding. They're not boring though, they're super exciting. They're more like bombastic and with bravura and bravado. I don't know, we'll come up with something better than boring, because they're not boring. But we're just we're joking, we're having fun with it. But it's this old technology. And then we get in the other magnetic modes, right? So the easy way to remember the other magnetic modes, I'll give you another little acronym here, a handy dandy way of remembering things, is so we can spell it like this. Alrighty then. Thanks everybody for saying hello in the chat while I'm taking care of business here with some teaching materials. I can't wait to finally figure out how to use OBS. That'll be fun. Then we can get this stuff up on the screen. So cave cog, right? These are your magnetic modes. This is the 6 plus 1. So actually the plus 1 is S. Okay, so, oh man, I got so many things going on here. I love it. So cave cog, right? And plus 1 equals S. Let's make it more complex than it needs to be. But we have the kinesthetic, the auditory, the visual, and we have the conceptual, the olfactory, and the gustatory. So in case you don't know olfactory, that's to smell, and gustatory is to taste. And then S is space, right? So here's the beautiful thing. Megaston, topos, hapantagar, kori. That's from Thales. Space is ultimate because it contains all things. So if you can remember cogs in a cave or a cave filled with cogs, then you know all of the magnetic modes, right? And the space is the ultimate. So I'm pretty sure I remember that correctly. Megaston, topos, hapanta, gar, kori. Space is ultimate because it contains all things. Now, that's a good example. How did I memorize that? Well, Megatron from the Transformers. He is, you know El Topo, that movie? Everybody knows El Topo, right? El Topo, I believe, if memory serves, is Spanish for the mole. And you don't see, who here has seen El Topo? Come on. Anyway, this is an amazing movie. If you want to learn, you know, if you want to hear some beautiful language, watch that movie. Oh, El Topo. I met Otarowski, actually, the director. And there's a picture of him on my Facebook. So if we're not friends on Facebook, friend me up and look up that picture with Otarowski. Anyway, he directed El Topo and the Holy Mountain and Santa Sangre. Oh man, beautiful, beautiful stuff. Anyway, so if you can remember this, and by the way, El Topo has caves in it, and that cave is sort of referring to Plato's cave, but space is all things. So I got El Topo in there, and then Hapanta, well, one of my favorite phrases is Hapax legomenon, so I just have that as a concept because we can use concepts to help us remember. And then Gar, of course, is Garth from Wayne's World, and Corey is, you know, Corey Haim, or something. You know, like there's lots of options. Anyway, space is ultimate because it contains all things. That's from Thales. Thales was maybe considered sort of the first scientist, maybe the first philosopher. History is great. Learn it. Learn language. Memorize things. Really great. Okay, so back to our chat here. Oh yeah, we were talking about the metaphor thing. We'll get back to the chat in a second. If you're just joining us, hit me up with a thumbs up. Let me know in the live chat here where you are, what you're doing, what you think about language learning and so forth. And what was I going to say? Yeah, so Gary Small on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast with the neighborhoods. Basically, when I do something like these examples that I'm giving with Chinese or this ancient Greek phrase, which is years lost, or memorizing stuff from the Tanakh or whatever it is, when you get that information and you start encoding it with your cave cogs, right? Then you're going to make those sheaths fire together. You're wiring them together so they fire together later. And it's exactly like I said earlier in the live with the Chinese thing. It's like a set of dominoes. Now, a lot of people, what they want the memory palace to do is wrong. They want it to somehow, well, it's not wrong. It's not wrong. There's no wrong. Wrong is relative to your results, basically. If you're not getting the results that you're looking for, then I guess that's wrong. But if you, even then, if you look at it clinically, if you step back, if you don't get too involved emotionally in it all and you don't judge yourself, then there's no wrong. It's just the result, right? And it's amazing. It's fun. It's just fun. It's beautiful. It's glorious. Dive in. Get it. Rock and roll. Okay, so that's basically how it works. That's why it works. And you can apply it to anything you want to learn. One of the things that's really important is to understand that there's a bit of a paradox. It's that all of these things are the same, and yet they all have their own nuances. So that's why I call magnetic memory method a method. It's a method, it's not systems. And a lot of people, they talk about on the internet, they ask me questions, or they just generally are asking about other people's systems. I totally think this is a false path. You create your own systems based on your understanding of methods and principles. That's what's going to work. That's what's going to work most profoundly. That's going to be the bots for you, right? That's what's going to help you SIP. That's what's going to get you into the G.A.P. If you don't know what these acronyms mean, please check out the replay. We'll get into it. And these acronyms are going to continue to accrete value over time for you. So that's basically how it works. It's just you're think about bread, the difference between bread and toast, okay? So when you put bread into a toaster, it undergoes a chemical change. That bread is never going back to toast, or sorry, that toast is never going back to bread, right? It is changed chemically. It's undergone classic scientific chemical change. It can't go back. It could become soggy. It could become eaten and digested and lost through those processes, but it's never going to go back to bread. And that's what happens when we encounter information, whether it's a person's name, it's a mathematical formula, and we do this, or a language, or parts of a language, phrases, sentences. When we do this and we accrete value, we build up our reserve, which is something I learned from Christine Till, that term, reserve, which I knew intuitively but never had a scientific word for it. When we build up our reserve, we're creating chemical changes in the brain. And this is why people who know multiple languages have more white and gray matter, right? And so you want to learn a language to save your brain so that you build up more reserve, which helps, well, we don't know this entirely, but it seems to be helping people not get dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's also helping you have better brain health generally, and it helps you be smarter for longer, sharper for longer. And the more that you can just study language as such, study topics as such, the more these beautiful little brain cells, neurons and stuff, they're just gonna, wow, they're gonna flourish and they're gonna feel so good. But you just take it one sip at a time and get in the G.A.P. and stay in the G.A.P. All right, so let's check in with our chats. If you're just joining us live, hit that thumbs up. Let me know where you are in the world, what you're doing, what you're thinking. Grant's here. Russian. My biggest problem is remembering grammar and remembering how to use the cases. Do you have any advice to get better at Russian grammar? So what, are there 11 Russian cases? First of all, grammar is an interesting subject. Do you need to get better at grammar, or do you need to remember more phrases that exemplify the rules that you're trying to remember? Think about that. That's typically the problem with grammar. People think that grammar is a special formula for getting more fluent, when it's the other way around. It's like, okay, so this case needs to operate this way. What are the 10 examples of that case I can memorize so that I got it covered? Now what's the next case? What are the 10 examples that I can memorize of that, right? And then you build intuition around it, as opposed to memorizing the rule as such. Memorize the rule through examples and then roll. That's really empowering. And that's just generally what I try to do. And so I might be a bit of a grammar idiot sometimes, but that's just because grammar gets in the way of progress a lot of the times. And if I want, I mean, basically I have a course on English grammar and memorizing it. And what I did is, I know how to memorize the stuff if you want to memorize grammar rules, but I got a grammar expert to explain them who uses the magnetic memory method. So that course is there for English grammar. And, you know, people exceed with it, but the reason why they get results from it is not because they memorize the grammar rules. It's because they memorize the examples that demonstrate the rule in action. So think about fluency as a highway, and think about you and your fluency, or your journey. You're in a car, right? And the car, grammar is like an engine that needs the fuel of vocabulary in order to get built. And it needs entire sentences in the piping and so forth, but it builds itself as it goes along. And then there are gas stations along the highway where you fill up with more vocabulary that builds the grammar engine as you go along. And it's not that it's not a chicken and the egg sort of thing. One builds the other
with the weird kind of thing that you can get perfectly fluent in a language and not know the grammar at all. And I'll tell you, speaking of Ollie Richards, who's come up a few times, when we were in Germany, I wanted to strut my stuff a little bit here and there and speak German a lot. And I would ask people, did I get that right? Like, what's the exact grammar rule there? Keine Ahnung. That was the answer every single time. Keine Ahnung. And people don't speak in grammar. They speak in the dialect, they speak in the neighborhood. And German can be really frustrating in some sense because you'll be in Pankow and they'll speak differently than they do in Charlottenburg or in Schöneberg. Like you'll hear Ikkekuf in part of Berlin that you will not hear any other part, or unless that person is there. So it's more about being in the language as opposed to memorizing the rules of the language. And Ollie and I have talked about that on the various podcasts that we've done. And I hope you find that empowering. I know it might be the frustrating sort of thing, but yeah, it comes down to that sort of thing from Kung Fu and all that sort of stuff. Who do you fear more? The man who knows 1,000 kicks, or the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times? And that's sort of what it is like. Do you want to know the person who knows the language and grammar? Or do you just want to know the person who's going to speak the language with you authentically? Maybe they make mistakes in their own mother tongue because they don't know their own grammar, right? They didn't learn it from a textbook. No, I learned so much of my German from taxi drivers and when I was in China practicing for my big moment, when I asked my father-in-law's permission to marry his daughter, like I just talked to taxi drivers. Do you think that their Chinese that helped me is in a grammar book? Well, I can tell you that it isn't, and it probably shouldn't be. So speak the language of people, and then yes, grammar has its place in your studies, but get the examples going. I hope that helps, Grant. You always study language learning itself. Listen to other people. Other people have conflicting views and so forth. There's a mosaic that you can enter, a nice discussion about what works. And you know what? It doesn't really matter what anybody else says about what to do or how to do it. What matters is that you get in the gap and you gradually accelerate your progress by taking it one sip at a time. Because the map is not the territory. You need to get into the territory. It's super important. Matthew says, Daniel Tammet can learn like in The Matrix. His brain inherently uses memory palace techniques because he has autism and synesthesia. Well, I've not talked with Daniel. There's a lot of controversy around him, and I would say that I don't know. I haven't taken his memory courses, but some people have suggested that he was teaching mnemonics before his whole story came out, and that you could buy training in memory. So we don't really know. I'm not going to cast judgment on it because I haven't taken his courses, but there is some controversy around it. What I will say is that he certainly seems to have demonstrated his abilities, and that's great. But I don't think he can learn like in The Matrix. And that just seems to be self-evidently so, because The Matrix is a movie. And as I said in the beginning, if you really watch The Matrix, when Neo says, I know Kung Fu, he doesn't know Kung Fu. And that's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is very clear if you watch it. Morpheus says, show me. And then they go and practice. And then when he demonstrates a certain level of skill, well then, the first thing that Morpheus does is shows him that he doesn't know squat because he jumps off the building and that sort of thing. And then, what does he do? They do the woman in the red dress test, right? To show that he doesn't know squat. And then, what happens is da-da-da-da-da-da-da. He has to die in order to really know what he has, right? And so it's like, there's a lot of the Plato allegories, Plato of the cave stuff going on, and then the movie ends with him actually being a superhero in the Matrix, and it begins with him still being the pretty weak and pathetic guy that he always was outside of the Matrix. So to say that anybody can do like what is in the Matrix, first of all, can't be done because it's a movie, and second of all, people aren't really interpreting the movie correctly in the way that the movie is actually telling us very clearly to interpret it in terms of the hero's journey. And so I don't want to get all Jordan Peterson on you, but I've done similar work in my academic career as Peterson does in terms of studying the deep structures of the mythological origins and the structures, the deep narrative it's called, in movies. So get into the Matrix and don't get all wow dazzled by stuff that isn't actually in the movie. That's not what the movie's saying, and it's not what humans are doing. There's no mnemonist that does that. And even if he has legitimately synesthesia as an advantage, which may be so, there is some interesting prehistory. And again, I've only seen this on a documentary. I'd have to go back and find that documentary and look at it, but I'm sure I can find it, where it's argued in that documentary, and they show the history that he was actually teaching memory techniques before he came out and had a business around memory techniques. So, call a spade, or at least do your investigation, because it's not it's not that case. There's multiple reasons why this is not a Matrix-like situation that we're seeing in real life. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't people with extraordinary memory abilities. There are, and there are wonderful cases of it. But things like hyperthymesia and so forth, that could be a blessing or a curse. And, just think of how the world plays out in terms of what people who use and have memory techniques do. Only a very small percentage of them go on to work towards creating a community, building a community, changing the world, helping people, trying to figure out what it is that's really going to help people, opening as many doors into that. And it's, of course, very good when people do that. Excellent, actually. But it's just ultimately very, very few people do it, And so I'd like for them to be more. And I'd like for that to be there. But back to Jordan Peterson, what's going to matter is telling the truth, right? And so we've got to tell the truth about this beautiful tradition of memory techniques. And the truth is that you can do it, anybody can do it, but one of the first things that you need to do is cut out the BS metaphors and go for the gold. Go for what really works. Go for what actually gets you the results, which is learning the techniques, studying them, implementing them, practicing them, and then gradually accelerating your progress. It's very, very simple to do. It's easy to do. It's how you rode a bike. It's how you tied your shoes. It's great. And what I talk about so much on this channel and throughout the podcast is the importance of actually looking at your results, looking at what's happening, and improving as you go along by doing this analytically. So if you read Malcolm Gladwell and the 10,000 hours stuff, well, you don't need 10,000 hours for this. You need just to dive in, and many people have within 6 months or less gone and won memory championships. So it's not a 10,000 hour rule sort of thing. Now, whether or not you're going to be the person who does it or not, I don't know. I hope that you are. This is why I do what I do. I mean, I'm essentially playing the mythological role of Morpheus, who's saying, look, you're the one. You're the only one who can do this. You're the one who can do this. No one else can. Only you. You are the one. But are you going to be the one? And are you going to be the one who says, oh yeah, maybe I didn't download Kung Fu so much. Maybe I do need to practice a little bit more. And maybe I do get seduced by the woman in the red dress. And maybe I need to work on that. And maybe I'm not in the Matrix. Maybe there is the real world, and maybe I can develop these superpowers in the real world, and so forth. So, if anything, that's my role, is to say, this is the way. Are you going to be the one who does it? And I hope that you are, because you're the only one who can be. So, Kai is from Austin, Texas. Awesome. 2P Mateys here. Good morning, Anthony. Thank you. Greetings from Brazil, Anthony. From Jiao, thank you. Grant's from Utah. Avery is in Ballinger, Texas. And Grant says, thank you. I'm going to try and create examples and phrases to help me better understand. Awesome. So, yeah. Now, Jiao, that was John Paul, maybe, was it? Let's see. So I got to work on encoding your guys' names. But in any case, I remember seeing you before. Thank you for being here. This is what we got. CaveCog, we got the bots, and we've got G.A.P and SIP. So What were those things? Gradually accelerate your progress, right? Gradually accelerate your progress. Always study, implement, and practice. And keep going, and you're going to get there. You're going to have an amazing time. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks for all the thumbs up. Thanks for letting me know where you are in the world. If you missed this live and you want to be on the replay, well, by all means, and leave a comment below. If you're on the replay now, leave a comment below, and let me know where you are in the world and all the things that you're working on. If you're learning the language, I'm going to come back later, put some stuff there in the description of the links so that you can read some things and enjoy actually a podcast about all the reasons why learning a language is so good for your brain. And I've only read half the book, but I highly recommend this. I'm going to read the second half later today, and this is really good, really inspiring, and gave me some of the things that we talked about today about why language is so important. We need diversity. We need to be able to express ourselves better, our identities better through language. Languages contain history of so many cultures, and it's the sum of human knowledge that we're able to get when we learn languages, and our brains have the capacity to do it. That's one of the most compelling points in this book, is that our brains have the capacity to learn languages. Everyone's brain does. Your brain, my brain, everybody's brain, and we have the capacity for multiple languages, and we just got to find our way in. And people give up too quickly on certain things, and often it's just a matter of having the right encouragement, the right angle opened up for you. And how do you get this opened up? Well, one of the ways is you come and study like we're doing now. We're studying what we're discussing. There's study through discourse. There's study through discussion. And another one of the big points in here is that more than half of the human race is bilingual, right? Wouldn't you want to be part of that? Wouldn't you want to join that? Encounter more art, encounter more literature, more music, more people to speak with, and then understand language as a structure better. Understand language as something that is more like music than you think, and how the mnemonics are more like music than you think, and how you can really dive into this and just have an amazing time with this. Tu es stercus, locer latinam. Would you say that using yourself in a mnemonic is useful? Imagining an extra finger. If I need the six causes of World War I. That's an interesting example. Certainly, I've used my own body as for mnemonics. Obviously, that your body is a memory palace, and you can use it for memorizing the parts of the body parts in other languages. You can use it for the articles of the body parts of other languages. You can use it for non-physical things in other languages. Now, if you're going to invent a sixth finger, that's okay, but that's going to create cognitive load, right? Anything that you invent, when it comes to spatial memory, anything that you invent that's not really a space has more cognitive load than that which you do not invent because it's real. So there are scales of immediacy. Some people are very good at invented memory palace elements, or virtual memory palaces and virtual memory palace elements. So it's up to you. You need to create the system. And the more systematic you are, I think the more that these things will help you. So I talk a lot about systems in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass, and particularly the Mastermind. The Masterclass is the training, and the Mastermind is more like drilling down into every aspect of the theory in a structured lesson setting. And there's a special offer right now at magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, YouTube special offer. magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO. So go and grab that before it's gone, and check it out. Get in the gap. And yes, that's a very good question. I appreciate you asking that, because in general, that's going to come down to study, implement, and practice. And you can get very strong at it. And then, you got to measure and judge and determine whether that's really, really good for you and whether it's getting you the outcome that you want. Everything comes down to the outcome that you want. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people, they don't really know what outcomes that they want, which is why we talk a lot in the Masterclass and the Mastermind about how to properly set goals. And by the way, if you weren't here earlier, a very special offer. If you let me know that you saw this live and that you got this offer, YTSO, magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO, I am going to give you Magnetic Memory Method Live in London, the 2015 recordings where Ollie Richards was in attendance and Mark Shannon was there. He is one of the world memory champions, and he talks about the habits that he created for himself in order to be able to win the memory championships. And wow, it's such a great talk. It's amazing. It is worth the price of the admission to the masterclass and the mastermind. It's worth double that if you're prepared to listen, to study, to implement, to study and to implement and practice. Because even habits, they require a bit of practice. And there are different things that different people will say about how many times you need to do a habit in order to get it to become eternal or on a loop and so forth. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that number is specific to you. So I know everybody wants it easy, right? They want that clear, down pat answer. But the reality is that you got to get in and repeat it for as long as it takes for you to do it. A lot of the research shows that it's not 30 days or 29 days or whatever days that they came from. Richard Weissman in 59 Seconds says that it's about 60 to 90 days minimum to get a habit in order. And when you think about it, that's nothing, especially when you know how to reduce something like learning a language down to 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour a day, at least in terms of the encoding through memory techniques. Then your reading, writing, speaking, and listening practice, you maximize that value because you've actually got it in your memory, you've memorized it like that. Then you can do things a lot faster with a lot greater integrity, a lot greater flow, and you can get that gradual I'm getting tired here and getting thirsty and getting hungry. It's almost lunch. But you can get that gradual acceleration of practice going on as you study, implement, and practice. And I hope you enjoyed the metaphors of the Matrix today, diving deep into that. I'm really passionate about interpreting movies correctly, and so I'm really excited about some of the discussion and the debate that's been on the internet lately about interpretation and the role of looking at texts and the deep structures in them. And so I hope that comes up more because it's super valuable and it's so good for your memory. So thank you for that good question. I really appreciate it. I thank everybody for all the great questions today, and thank you for being here. Again, if you want more education like this, be a supporter of it. Make sure you're liking and sharing posts and embedding them in your blogs, these videos, and putting them on your Facebook pages and so forth. That's the grassroots effort. We get together, we make the world better together, because the internet is under attack. I don't know if you guys understand just how much it's under attack. Speaking of the Matrix and things, just net neutrality, if you're not following this and you care about the internet, you care about the freedom of information, please do follow this. We do need to gradually accelerate the progress of people being involved in this beautiful thing that humanity together has created, which is equality of information streaming across the internet, and it is under threat very seriously right now. And only you at an individual level and collectively together can we preserve what we care about. And so if we want humans to gradually accelerate their progress, we're going to need to preserve net neutrality, and it's very, very important. So don't just support the individual teachers on the internet that you care about by sharing their stuff and by interacting with their videos, by commenting on them and putting the thumbs up and so forth, but also be educated about problems with the internet, because YouTube makes changes all the time and it's free right now, but be thankful for it, be grateful for it, because it doesn't have to be free forever, and it's really endangered right now. And only you can make your voice part of what is keeping it free, keeping it so that it is equally accessible across the board for all people. And otherwise, we'll go into a dark ages again. It'll be network television. Oh, you know what? But there might be some positives to that. The internet as network television, all ad-driven and blah, 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 so forth. The positive would be back to the library. But you know what? You can still go to the library. So, yeah, Tuas Stericus Lacor Latinam says free internet for all. That would be great. That would be great. It's very important. Last thing I'll say, though, is that you need to implement, because one of the dark sides of the internet, and where it might be a positive if the internet costs more, which is what the net neutrality problem is leading to, is that internet will become very, very expensive for people to use. and different things on the internet, different kinds of information that you like will cost more or less. Why that's so dangerous for humanity and so forth is that people will then reserve. They'll be like, oh, I'm not going to watch that TED Talk that might actually help me improve my life. I'm just going to save all of my data for Netflix instead. Not that anything wrong with, there's nothing wrong with Netflix, but it won't necessarily be good if people aren't, taking in the occasional educational content that's free, and then they won't implement on it. But people are also already hunter-gatherer syndromes. The internet has really accelerated this hunter-gatherer thing where people are hunting and collecting, but they're not implementing. And so you need to implement. So I hope if I've ever done anything for you, it's to implement on these techniques. Study, implement, practice, and gradually accelerate your progress with the bots. So Tua says, it will come to the contradiction of the Regents exam. Okay, I don't know what the Regents exam is, but I got to look that up. I got to remember to look it up. But thank you for sharing that. John says, how do you go about retrieving the information that you encoded in your memory palaces? We're getting off here. It's lunchtime, but you can go watch the replay. You can also make sure to have taken the free course at magneticmemorymethod.com/YT, or grab the special offer, which is at YTSO, magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO. And we talked about that on this live. Also, you just got to have it encoded in the first place. And the process of creating memory palaces and using them will teach you a lot about how to decode from memory palaces. So dive in. Keep on diving. And don't forget your cave cogs. Really powerful stuff right here. And even if it's bots, very powerful. Thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate it. Thanks John for that last question, and sorry we got a jet, but really appreciate it. Thanks for all the thumbs up. Keep hitting those thumbs up, and implement, and be the hero that helps save the internet. Be the hero who helps save your own mind, and dive in. Study, implement, and practice. If you want to study, if you want the full suite with a special offer, and I'll throw in, let me know that you got it from this video. I'll throw in Magnetic Memory Live for free with Mark Shannon's wonderful, wonderful talk on memory techniques at magneticmemorymethod.com/YTSO. Thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate it as always. I know I'm saying thank you 1,000 times, but I am 1,000 times grateful. I really appreciate every minute that we get to spend together live. I appreciate all those thumbs up. I appreciate all the comments. If you're on the replay, come back. Check it out again, skim through it, leave a comment below. And Avery says, a wonderful stream. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And check out this book, Language Death. Really important. It will unlock some great ideas for you. And if you're not already learning a language, I think this will convince you to do it. It doesn't have to be an endangered language. It doesn't have to be a dead language. But for the health of your brain, please, please, please learn a language. And I'm going to come back after lunch, put some links below. One of them will show you why that language learning is so good for your brain in the form of the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. There's 15 reasons, and you're going to love them. So thanks again, everybody. Until we have a chance to speak again, come visit me at magneticmemorymethod.com. Grab the YTSO offer so I can send you Magnetic Memory Live with Mark Shannon. And until we speak again, keep yourself magnetic, and maybe get one of these days. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.